This is the second part and extension to my previous video, which covered a bit on compile and link features of AngularJS. In this video, we are going to see a bit more on basics of how to modify DOM, how to set some data using scope, how to work with events, etc. during the compiling and linking process available as part of AngularJS. So you can already see that we have the compile, pre-link and post-link along with the controller. So these are all the things which we have already covered in my previous video. And we have some basic HTML which actually tries to render our directive in a nested format. Like we have the message inside message, and we also have another message. So we have three levels of nesting. And once we have executed this, we are going to see something similar to this. So we have all the compiles to be executed first, then followed by all the controllers with pre, that is pre-link. And once all the controllers with the pre-links have been completed, you can see we have the post-links to be executed. So this is what we have already seen earlier. Now we are going to just extend this a bit and see on how to modify DOM, at what level we can modify DOM, and how to set some data, how to work with events as part of directives. So while we are working with this, we are not going to concentrate on something advanced features, but just wanted to go with some basics on how we can accomplish few things and to understand more about compile and link. It is not a focus on advanced directives, but it is more of a kind of focus on compilation and linking process. Okay, so just for our understanding, in this case, I would like to modify the message related template. So I just wanted to remove everything whatever I have in place, and now you can see I have a directive called message which is attached to this template, and I just wanted to have some dynamic values to be displayed here. So you can see I am going to have ng repeat to be added, and as part of this ng repeat, all I would like to say is something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I would like to display I, which is available. So what I am accomplishing here is I am actually asking the ng repeat to go after all of these values, and for each and every iteration of these values place the respective value in I, and and send the same value I to the attribute called text. So text is going to have the evaluated expression value of I, and at the same time we are actually trying to display some kind of expression based data binding here, which will be automatically displayed as content inside the div. So this is our template, and as you can see, this template is going to be instantiated always whenever the compilation has just completed. So which means after the compilation, the template gets instantiated. In this case, we are using ng repeat. So which means this template gets instantiated 5 times, as because I am using 5 values here, ng repeat iterates for 5 times, and thus the same template gets instantiated for 5 times. And let me change my a01.js accordingly. So as part of this a01.js, I would like to have t-attributes.text. So we are using the same text, so we are still good, no issues, and we are trying to display text here. And we need to do something for this one, but we'll come back here. So let me save my files here, and also let us check how the cycle, or say life cycle, of our directive template is currently being performed. So I go back here and just refresh this. Okay, you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all of these values are actually instantiated. So if you go to inspect, you are going to see the div which is being instantiated 5 times. So you can see this is the first one, this is the second one, third one, fourth one, and fifth one. So if you go back to your source, you already have a template defined, but you did not define this one 5 times. It has been instantiated 5 times just because you used ng repeat. And while it is being instantiated, it knows that it needs to fetch the value from this list for the respective iteration, and the value will be automatically sent to text as attribute value. And of course it is going to display the content of the value of I in the form of a content for the div. And that's exactly what is happening here. So we are good till there. And let us see on how this is being performed from the execution perspective. So as we know, the compilation has to take place, and in this case you can see we have only one compile. As I mentioned, once a template gets compiled, it never gets compiled once again. So compile is a process which gets accomplished only once. So even in this case you can see I have compile, which performs some compilation on our particular template to actually parse all the existing directives or child directives and so on. So the compilation is being performed on our directive, and that too on the template, and that too happens only once. And in this case it is not evaluating the value of I. So if you go back here to our a01.js, you can see I have the compile, and I'm trying to access the text attribute through t attributes. And at this moment it is not really evaluating the value, because during the compilation of a template there is no scope available. Scope is made available only through controller pre and post, and as there is no scope, there is no way it can really evaluate any kind of expression you might be providing as part of your attributes, and thus it directly gives whatever is available in the form of a string, which gets displayed straight in the form of the same whatever the user has provided. Okay, and next you can see I have the controller pre and post. Controller pre and post. So this is the first div. This part happens for the first div. This part happens for the second div, third div, fourth div, and finally fifth div. So these are all you can see post is happening right after immediately the pre in this case, because these are not nested. In my previous example, that is in my previous video, we have been nesting the directives. If you are nesting the directives, then the post will be happening at the very bottom or at the very last. If you are not nesting the directives, each and every directive is individual on its own, and they will have their own life cycle. So the controller, the pre-link, the post-link will be executed on each of those instantiated templates individually by themselves, as because no instance is really related to the other, and they are not nested as well. Okay, so you can say I have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and all of those values are currently available through pre and post. So if you go back here, you can see in the pre, I'm actually trying to access the text from the instantiated element related attributes called I attributes. So this is template attributes, this is instant attributes. So from the instance perspective, you can see I have the evaluation done successfully, and even in the post you can see the evaluation has been done successfully, and you are having the values to be displayed here 1 and 1. But for controller this is a bit strange. Even though the controller is having its own scope, it is not really evaluating. So in order to evaluate it, you have to actually include $interpolate, which means you are manually doing the interpolation of this particular string. So which means interpolate means you are providing the string with some kind of evaluation of expression, and that needs to be performed as part of the same scope. So in this case you are trying to evaluate your particular expression which is available inside another string or mixed up with string and variables and so on, called an interpolated string. So interpolated string means it is just a constant string which has got some values or variables which need to be evaluated at runtime. So that is called an interpolated string. And in order to have that whole expression to be evaluated, we would like to use $interpolate. So in this case we don't need it, but if you really wanted to use it, then we need to inject it. So we need to use this interpolate and use the same module, that particular interpolate. And you can see the first thing is that it is asking for the text. So in this case I would like to evaluate the text available in the form of interpolated string. And that actual, okay, I'm missing one thing. We also need to evaluate against this particular scope. So we have the text, which is nothing but this one. So this I is the text, and that needs to be evaluated against the scope. And once it has evaluated the scope, I would like to have the value out of it, or say once the evaluation of the expression has been completed, the result needs to be stored as part of V, and I would like to have that V to be displayed. So in this case, I just wanted to save this. I would like to have V to be displayed instead of the attribute directly. So once I save this, let me refresh this, and now you can see I have the controller also displaying the value 1, 1, 1. So we have controller, pre and post links doing their things successfully with no issues at all. Okay, so this is pretty much about the controllers, and the directive related controllers, the pre and post links, on how they work whenever you use ng-repeat. Okay, let us switch back to our JavaScript code a bit and enhance this to actually include a few more things. The first thing, so let me go back here. So I have the div with all the values displaying, and I would like to have each of those divs to be having some kind of border at runtime. So I do not want to provide those characteristics or the formatting right inside the template. So if you really wanted to have the template to be maintaining its own border, it is easier. Like I can provide style equal to something like border 1 pixel and border 1 pixel and solid, and at the same time imagine I would like to have some gray there. So this is the easiest way where I can directly provide inside the template itself. So let me see if this is working. And there you go. So you can see I have the border to be displayed for every div. So that is still valid. But my intention is not to modify the DOM right inside the template in this case. So I just would like to explore on how I can modify the DOM at runtime, and that too during the process of compilation and linking. Okay. We know that we can always modify the DOM in compile or pre or post. And each of those have their own restrictions on how you can really modify. So let us come back to our JavaScript file. We know that compile is having access to the template directly. So this is the template element. Compile does not have access to instantiated elements. It has direct access to the template element. So in this case, this T element is nothing but a reference to this guy directly. So this whole part is made available as part of T. And now I can use this one, which is a jQuery element, by the way. So this T element is a jQuery element. So I can say T element.css border, and I can say 1 pixel solid, and at the same time I use C0, C0, C0 for the gray. And what I'm doing at this moment is I'm applying this CSS style for the template. When you apply for the template, it will be carried over to all the instances later. So any functional thing you write inside the compile function will always be available for every instantiated element. So if you modify T element, once it has been modified, it will be cloned and instantiated for each of the iterations. So each of the iterations will have the instantiated elements with exactly on how you modify your DOM. So let me save this and let us ensure I do not have the CSS here. So I do not have the CSS. I click save here, go back here, and now you can see I still have my borders to be applied automatically. So let me change the color a bit. So in this case, I would like to have something like red. Let us consider. Okay, I do not need this. And let me refresh this. And now you can see I have the red border to be displayed everywhere. So let me get back to my previous one. Okay. So let me refresh this. I have the gray border, which has been accomplished through modifying the DOM inside the compile function. Okay, so now that we have some understanding on how to modify DOM template or say template DOM during the compilation, we need to understand on how to modify the DOM of the instantiated elements also. So let me come here. So let us imagine I have a strange requirement where the third one should be actually having the border red. So what I'm saying is that whenever I find the attribute value as 3, I would like to have that particular div to be having a border with red. The rest of the divs or rest of the elements should be still working with gray, except the one which is having the value 3 to be mentioned as red. To be rendered as red. So for that purpose, you can see we are really working with instances. There's nothing we can work at template, right? Because template applies to all the instances. But in our case, we are working with the logic with a very specific evaluation of the instance. So we need to check every instance values or elements here and modify the DOM. And as I covered in my previous session, post is the best location where you can really modify your DOM, right? Because everything has been already done by that time. And I would like to take advantage of post link function here. So in this case, I would like to check the attribute value, that is text, and if it is equal to 3, I would like to say go to my instantiated templated element and then apply the border. So in this case, I would like to use the same border whatever I used here, except that I would like to have this one to be red. So I'm applying red border if and only if that particular attribute value text is always 3. If it is not 3, I am not going to apply any border, which means it contains the default border, which is always gray in this case. So let me save this, go back here and press refresh. And now you can see only the third one has been highlighted because we applied the logic only for the value 3, and the rest are still having their own gray backgrounds. So we have seen on how to modify the DOM using the compile function and at the same time post link function. We have not really added any kind of eventing here. So let us consider the moment I click on these particular divs, I would like to have a simple message to be displayed to the user based on the value we have selected here. So which means if I click on this fourth div, I would like to have a message 4 to be displayed. If I click on this div, I would like to have message 5 to be displayed. So in order to accomplish such things, the easiest way, as I mentioned in my previous video, post is the best location to attach any event handlers, as because at that time we have the instantiated element and it has been completely ready for the rendering. So I still make use of my I element to actually add event handlers. Okay, but as we know, we can also have some kind of data or any kind of functions to be added to the scope right inside the controller. So if you have any functional logic to be actually maintained, scope related stuff should always be available or made available through the controller. So if you have functional stuff, it is always better to write as part of the controller, and that too related to directive. So in this case I am going to go for scope and button click, and I would like to say whenever I click on here, I would like to have the value of v to be displayed. So you can see this controller works for every instance. So which means every instance of the template is going to have its own controller, its own scope, and this is the instantiated element. So I am actually working with the scope of the respective instantiated element only. So which means if I have 5 divs created by this template, each of those particular divs will have their own scope and their own button click event along with their own interpolation and the values as well. So I am currently attaching something like button click function to the scope, for which I am going to access that right inside the I element. So as we have seen in my previous video, we are not supposed to access DOM of the element here. We are always supposed to access the DOM right inside the post function. So here I am going to say iElement dot. As I mentioned previously, tElement is a jQuery element. Similarly, iElement is also a jQuery object. So I am going to say on click. I would like to say go to the scope. Why? Because we have access to scope here, which is nothing but the one which has been carried out from the controller. So from the controller related scope, what we have, I just wanted to mention, please execute the button click. So you can see I already defined button click through the scope, which is exactly available through the scope of postLink function. So I'm just accessing this guy right here. So I'm attaching the event handler for the click, and once I click that, it is going to execute this guy. Thereby I'm going to have the alert to be displayed. So let me save all of this and refresh this. We are not going to have any difference here until and unless I click on here, which exactly gives the current value of the div whatever we are clicking on. So these are all the ways, at least the basic ways on how we can really manipulate DOM at runtime at either compilation level or post level or post link level. You can provide some data here if you want to using the scope, and provide all the event handlers where you can attach all the event handlers right inside the post. So in that way we can use our compile, pre and post. So there are a couple more things which we need to understand, like not every example you find on the net are going to have compile, pre and post. There are some shortcuts on how you can really make use of these particular functions. So if you, so let me comment this a bit. So I just cloned it. So I just wanted to check on how we can have other ways of doing the same thing. So imagine you do not have anything to be provided as part of your compilation functionality, which means I do not really want these statements to be provided. So you can remove this altogether, including the compile, and all you have to do is just provide only pre and post, which might be required. So you might not really need to provide compile if you are not providing any functional part of the compile. So in this case I can get rid of this whole thing. Of course, instead of this whole thing, I still need to provide link. So if you're not providing compile, you just need to provide the link object, which essentially says that you are returning the link, which the link has got these two functions, and those two are okay. This is related to this, and I don't need this guy, so I can just get rid of this one. Yeah, this is the one. So I have the link, which essentially returns pre and post, and we do not have compile here, and the controller will be working as usual. So I just save this and I just run this, and we should be still be getting this 2, 4, 5 and so on. You can see as I removed the compile related functionality, we are not going to have the gray border, right? Because we just removed it. So this is another shortcut if you really wanted to work with only pre and post but not really compile. Okay, there are a couple more ways on how we can achieve the same thing. So let me reduce this quite a bit. Okay, so now another flavor. So imagine I'm going to have only post, which means there is nothing I'm really writing as part of pre. So I do not really need to have pre in here. So if you would like to have something like that, but imagine you would like to have some compile also to be provided, then you can still make use of your compile. So I can still get to this. So let me use this. So I'm still making use of the compile. However, I do not want the pre, but as part of the compile I would like to execute my previous stuff, that is console and the tElement. So I still need some compile related functionality to be introduced here, but I do not have pre here. All I really have is just the post. So if such is the case, the simplest way is just return it. So if you see a compile with the last statement as return, which means this you are returning a post function. This is essentially a post function. This is very, very important, or say post link function for that matter. So even if you do not specify post, but if you are returning a function as part of the compile, essentially you are returning the post related function. So that is very important. So let me save this and return this, and you can see still it works with all of that stuff. And we do not have pre here. All we have is the controller and the post along with the compile. So this is just another shortcut. So most of the time, whenever you are searching for online samples, you are going to see something like this. So do not get panic with that. All you are really writing is the compile along with the post function as this. And further, let me reduce this further. So imagine I do not want to have any kind of compile related functionality in this case. Yes, you can still get rid of this whole thing, and all I can really have is just the post function, and I do not need anything else. And imagine I do not want to have the controller too. You can just remove the controller as well. But in this case, I will not have click anymore, as because I removed the controller as well. So all we are having now is just the post function, and we do not need even this return as well. So now we have a very simple directive with just the post link function. So this is just another way to write your post function. So most of the online samples will have this kind of syntax if they are not related to any compile or pre or controller. So if your particular application or your directive doesn't have compile, and if it doesn't have the controller, and if it doesn't have the pre-link function, and all you are working really with this is the post link function, you just return directly the post function. That is good enough. So in this case I have everything. So let me indent this, and now I returned here, and still you can see my post linking is working, but I do not have my event handling to be performed here, as because I removed it directly from the controller, and thus all we really have is only this one. So these are all the various ways on how you can simplify the boilerplate of coding which you have in place for the compilation and pre-linking and post-linking and the controller. So we do not need each and every of that step in order to develop the directive. You just focus on whatever you really want to. If you have post, just return only the post. If you have controller, just have the controller and post in place. You might not really need compile or pre or so on. So that is pretty much about on how the compile and the linking really work as part of AngularJS. And in my upcoming videos, we are still going to go in depth about the scoping and so on, which will be a bit different whenever you are working with directives.